The sound of a gunshot echoed across the barren landscape of the Arizona Territory as Wilhelmina Sutton collapsed onto the scorching sand, blood seeping through her torn dress. Her husband of 3 years, Theodore, stood over her, the smoking revolver still in his hand, his face devoid of any emotion as he mounted his horse and rode away with all their money and possessions, leaving her to die under the merciless June sun of 1878. "This is what happens to wives who ask too many questions," were his final words to her as the bullet tore through her shoulder. Wilhelmina Willa, to those who knew her, had never imagined her life would end this way. At 24, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. Growing up in Boston as the daughter of a successful merchant, she had been sheltered, educated, and groomed for a respectable marriage. Then, Theodore Sutton had swept into her life with promises of adventure and a new life in the West. The desert heat beat down on her prone form as consciousness ebbed and flowed. Blood loss and dehydration were working in tandem to hasten her end. Her thoughts became a fragmented parade of regrets. She should have heeded her father's warnings about Theodore's shifting eyes and too smooth manner. She should have questioned why they needed to leave town so suddenly, why he was always secretive about his business dealings, why the money always seemed to appear and disappear without explanation. In her lucidity, she realized the truth that had been staring her in the face for months. Theodore was a con man, a thief, perhaps worse, and now she was paying the price for her willful blindness. "Not like this," she whispered, her cracked lips barely moving as she tried to push herself up. The effort sent bolts of pain shooting through her shoulder, and she collapsed again onto the unforgiving earth. Time lost all meaning. The sun traversed the sky, and still Willa lay in the sand, drifting between consciousness and oblivion. The vultures had begun to circle, patient harbingers of death awaiting their feast. Her skin burned, then grew numb. Her mouth, once moist and pink, became a desert in its own right. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire, Willa heard the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. A hallucination, she thought, another cruel trick of her dying mind. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, until a shadow fell across her face. "Sweet Jesus," a deep voice exclaimed. Through swollen eyelids, she saw a silhouette against the flaming sky, a man astride a horse, his broad-brimmed hat obscuring his features. He dismounted in one fluid motion and knelt beside her, pressing gentle fingers to the side of her neck. "Not yet, madam," he said firmly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "You ain't dying today." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that death had already claimed her for its own. But no words would come. Strong arms lifted her with surprising gentleness, and she felt herself being placed across a saddle. The pain in her shoulder flared anew, and darkness claimed her once more. Willa awoke to the sensation of coolness against her brow. The first thing she noticed was the absence of the sun's brutal heat. Instead, she lay on a straw-filled mattress in what appeared to be a small, rustic cabin. A damp cloth was pressed to her forehead, and a man sat beside the bed, his weather-beaten face etched with concern. "You're back with us," he said, relief evident in his tone. Was starting to worry. She tried to speak, but her throat was too parched. Noting her distress, he reached for a tin cup of water and gently lifted her head, helping her drink in small, measured sips. "Easy now. Too much at once will make you sick." When she had taken enough water to moisten her throat, she managed to whisper, "Who are you?" "Name's Reese Montgomery. Found you out in the Sonora about 5 miles from here. Someone left you for dead." The memories flooded back with crushing force. Theodore's betrayal, the gunshot, the endless hours baking in the desert sun. Tears sprang to her eyes, mixing with the sweat on her face. "My husband," she croaked. Reese's expression hardened. "Your husband did this to you." She nodded weakly. Theodore, he shot me. Took everything. A muscle twitched in Reese's jaw. Well, Miss Sutton, Wilhelmina Sutton. Miss Willa, he said, shortening her name with an ease that should have bothered her but somehow didn't. Your husband's a dead man walking. But that's a concern for later. Right now, we need to get you healed up. For the first time, Willa became aware that her shoulder had been bandaged. The pain was still there, throbbing in time with her heartbeat, but it was muted somehow. I cleaned and dressed your wound, Reese explained, following her gaze. Bullet went clean through, which is a blessing. Gave you some laudanum for the pain, though I'm running low. Thank you, she whispered. Why did you help me? Reese's eyes, a startling shade of blue, she now noticed, held hers steadily. Out here, we look after our own. No one deserves to die alone in the desert. I'm not one of your own. You don't know me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're alive, ain't you? That makes you one of mine now. The next few days passed in a haze of pain, fever, and fitful sleep. Reese proved to be a diligent caretaker, changing her bandages, spooning broth into her mouth when she was too weak to feed herself, and speaking to her in that steady, reassuring voice when nightmares of Theodore and the desert jerked her awake. On the fourth day, her fever broke, and Willa awoke with a clarity that had been absent since the shooting. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. She was alone, but she could hear movement outside, the chopping of wood, from the sound of it. Gingerly, she pushed herself into a sitting position. Her shoulder protested, but the pain was manageable. She took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small but neat, with a stone fireplace at one end, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, and shelves holding a few books, tinned goods, and assorted supplies. The bed she occupied seemed to be the only one, which raised the question of where Reese had been sleeping. As if summoned by her thoughts, the door opened, and Reese entered, carrying an armload of firewood. He stopped short when he saw her sitting up. Well, look at you, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Thought you might be on the mend. Thanks to you, Willa replied. I don't know how to repay your kindness, Mr. Montgomery. Reese, he corrected, moving to stack the wood by the fireplace. And there's no debt to repay. Anyone with a heart would have done the same. But they wouldn't have, Willa knew. In her 3 years with Theodore, traveling from town to town across the West, she had seen enough of human nature to know that kindness like Reese's was rare indeed. Where are we? She asked, changing the subject. My homestead, about 20 miles outside of Tucson. He dusted off his hands and approached the bed. How's the shoulder feeling? Better, still painful, but not as bad. Reese nodded. Good. Infection was what I feared most, but you're tough. Fought it off like a true frontier woman. Willa managed a small laugh. Hardly. I was born and raised in Boston. I know more about tea parties than surviving in the wilderness. And yet here you are, Reese pointed out. Surviving. He moved to the stove and poured a cup of coffee, which he brought to her. The rich, bitter aroma was intoxicating after days of broth and water. Thank you, she said, accepting the cup with her good hand. For everything. I would have died out there if not for you. Reese's expression turned serious. About your husband. Willa tensed. What about him? I need to know what happened, all of it. If I'm harboring you here, I need to understand what kind of danger might come calling. She nodded, acknowledging the fairness of his request. Taking a deep breath, she began her story. I met Theodore in Boston 3 years ago. He was charming, handsome, full of stories about the West. Said he was a businessman, investing in mining operations. My father was suspicious, but I was enchanted. She paused, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. We married quickly, and he convinced me to come west with him. That's when things began to change. Reese listened without interruption as Willa described the gradual unraveling of her marriage. Theodore's increasingly frequent absences, the mysterious men who would visit him, the way he would return flush with cash only to be penniless days later. I started asking questions, she continued, about his business, about where the money was coming from. He became angry, controlling. Then, 3 days ago, he told me we were leaving Tucson in a hurry. I overheard him talking with a man about a bank robbery they had pulled off. When I confronted him, her voice faltered. He shot you and left you to die, Reese finished for her, his voice hard. Willa nodded, tears threatening again. He took everything, our money, my jewelry, even my wedding band. Reese was silent for a long moment. Your husband's not just a would-be murderer. He's a wanted man. The Tucson bank was robbed last week, 3 men killed, including the bank manager. Willa's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, Reese said softly, but others might not. The law's looking for Theodore Sutton and his gang. If they find out you're his wife, they'll think I was involved. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was not only a victim, but also a potential suspect in a deadly crime. Reese nodded grimly. It might be best if you stay here for a while, at least until your shoulder heals fully. We're isolated enough that word doesn't travel fast. By then, maybe they'll have caught your husband and his gang. And if they don't? Willa asked, fear creeping into her voice. Reese's blue eyes met hers steadily. Then we'll figure something out. Together. There was a certainty in his voice that comforted her, though she barely knew this man. Perhaps it was the fact that he had saved her life, or maybe it was simply that after years of Theodore's lies, Reese's straightforward honesty was like a balm to her wounded spirit. As the days turned into weeks, Willa's strength gradually returned. Her shoulder healed slowly but steadily, and with it came a new sense of purpose. She refused to remain bedridden any longer than necessary and insisted on helping around the cabin, cooking, cleaning, mending Reese's clothes. It was the least she could do, she told herself, to repay his kindness. But in truth, there was more to it than that. Reese Montgomery was unlike any man she had ever known. Where Theodore had been smooth and polished, Reese was rough-hewn and direct. Where her husband had spun elaborate tales designed to impress and manipulate, Reese spoke simply and honestly. He was a rancher by trade, running a small herd of cattle on the land surrounding his cabin. He lived alone, had never married, and seemed perfectly content with his solitary existence until Willa had quite literally been dropped into his life. They fell into an easy rhythm together. During the day, Reese would tend to his cattle in the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. Willa would prepare meals, wash clothes, and gradually take on more tasks as her strength returned. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Reese would read aloud from one of his books, mostly dime novels, and a few classics he had picked up on his infrequent trips to town. One evening, as July gave way to August and the worst of the summer heat began to abate, Reese returned from checking on his herd with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Willa asked, immediately sensing that something was wrong. Reese hesitated, then sighed. Riders came through today, not close enough to spot the cabin, but they were definitely searching for something, or someone. Willa's blood ran cold. Theodore? Maybe, or maybe the law looking for him. Either way, it might not be safe for you here much longer. "What should we do?" she asked, unconsciously using the plural. Somewhere along the line, her problems had become their problems. Reese ran a hand through his sun-bleached hair. "I need to go into town, see what news there is, find out if they've caught your husband or if he's still out there somewhere." "I'll go with you," Willa said immediately. Reese shook his head. "Too risky. If Theodore hasn't been caught, you could be recognized. And if the law is still looking for his accomplices—" "I can't stay here alone," she protested, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. The thought of being separated from Reese, even for a day or two, filled her with an unnamed dread. Reese studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll need a story. As far as anyone knows, you're my sister, recently widowed, come to stay with me after your husband's death." Willa nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you. When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light. It's a full day's ride to Tucson. We'll stay one night, gather whatever information we can, and head back the next morning." That night, Willa found sleep elusive. Her shoulder ached dully, a reminder of Theodore's betrayal, and her mind raced with fears of what tomorrow might bring. Would someone recognize her as Theodore's wife? Would the law arrest her on suspicion of being his accomplice? And underlying all these fears was a new awareness, an awareness of Reese, sleeping just a few feet away on a pallet by the fire, as he had done every night since bringing her to his cabin. In the dim glow of the dying embers, she watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his features relaxed in sleep, making him look younger than his 30-odd years. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, one that had nothing to do with her healing wound, and everything to do with the man who had saved her life and now risked his own to protect her. The journey to Tucson was grueling, despite Reese's efforts to make it as comfortable as possible for Willa. They rode double on his sturdy gelding, with Reese insisting that she sit in front where he could support her if her strength flagged. The close proximity was both comforting and disconcerting. Comforting in the security of his solid presence at her back, disconcerting in the way her pulse quickened whenever his arms brushed against hers as he handled the reins. They reached Tucson as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The town was larger than Willa remembered, having only passed through it briefly with Theodore before he had taken her out to the desert to die. The streets bustled with activity miners coming off shift, cowboys in from the range, ladies of the evening beginning their nightly parade, and respectable townswomen hurrying to complete their errands before darkness fell completely. Reese guided the horse to a modest boarding house on the edge of town. "Mrs. Hollister's," he explained. "She's a widow, runs a clean place, and doesn't ask too many questions. We'll get rooms for the night." Mrs. Hollister proved to be a robust woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing but, true to Reese's word, a disinclination to pry. She accepted their story of brother and recently widowed sister without comment, showing them to adjoining rooms on the second floor. "Supper's at 6, she informed them briskly. "Don't be late or you'll go hungry till breakfast." Once she had departed, Reese turned to Willa. "Rest for a bit. I'm going to head to the saloon, see what news I can pick up." Willa nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her at the thought of being left alone. "Be careful." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." After he left, Willa sank onto the narrow bed, suddenly exhausted from the journey. Despite her intention to rest only briefly, she fell into a deep sleep, only to be awakened by a soft knock on her door. Disoriented, she sat up, realizing that the room had grown dark. "Willa," Reese's voice called softly. "Are you awake?" She hastened to the door, opening it to find him standing there, his expression grim in the dim light of the hallway. "What is it?" she asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Did someone recognize me?" Reese shook his head. "No, nothing like that. But I have news. Can I come in?" She stepped aside to let him enter, closing the door behind him. In the small, sparsely furnished room, his presence seemed even larger, more imposing than in the open spaces of his cabin. "Theodore's dead," he said without preamble. Willa felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She groped blindly for the edge of the bed, sitting down hard. "Dead? How?" "Shot during a botched robbery in Bisbee about a week ago. His gang tried to hit another bank, but the law was waiting for them. Theodore and one other man were killed. The third was captured." A strange numbness spread through Willa's limbs. Theodore, the man she had once loved, the man who had tried to murder her, was gone. She should feel something: grief, relief, anger, but instead there was only a hollow sensation in her chest. "There's more," Reese continued, sitting beside her on the bed. "The man they captured talked, told them everything about the Tucson robbery, about the other jobs they pulled. He mentioned Theodore's wife." Willa's head snapped up. "What about me?" "He said Theodore had told them his wife was dead, that he'd killed her because she found out about their activities and threatened to go to the law." "So they think I'm dead," Willa whispered. "Everyone thinks I'm dead." Reese nodded slowly. "It seems that way." A hysterical laugh bubbled up from Willa's throat. "He tried to kill me, and now everyone thinks he succeeded. It's almost poetic." Reese took her hands in his calloused palms rough against her softer skin. "Willa, do you understand what this means? You're free. No one's looking for you. No one suspects you of anything. You can start over, be whoever you want to be." The full impact of his words slowly sank in. Freedom. A concept so foreign after years of living under Theodore's controlling thumb, followed by weeks of hiding at Reese's cabin, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid. "I can go home," she said softly, thinking of Boston, of her parents who must believe her dead if word had reached them. "I can see my family again." Something flickered in Reese's eyes, a shadow, quickly masked. "Yes," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You can go home." But even as the words left her mouth, Willa realized that Boston no longer felt like home. The prim, proper world of her childhood seemed as distant and unreal as a half-remembered dream. Home, she was starting to realize, was a small cabin in the Arizona territory, with a man whose quiet strength had become her anchor in a storm-tossed sea. The next day, they delayed their return to the ranch. Reese had business to attend to, he said, supplies to purchase, a letter to post. Willa spent the morning in her room, contemplating her newfound freedom and the decision that now lay before her. When Reese returned in the late afternoon, he found her sitting by the window, watching the bustling street below. "I sent a telegram to your parents," he said without preamble, "letting them know you're alive and well." Willa turned to him surprised. "You did?" He nodded, setting down the packages he carried. "They should know their daughter isn't dead. I didn't give details, just said you were safe and would contact them soon." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. That was very kind." "It wasn't kindness," Reese said, his voice gruff. "It was right." There was an awkwardness between them now that hadn't existed before, a tension born of unspoken words and uncertain futures. Reese moved around the small room, unpacked his purchases, coffee, sugar, a few canned goods. "I've been thinking," Willa said finally, breaking the strained silence. Reese paused, a tin of peaches in his hand. "About going back east?" "About staying." The words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning. Reese set the tin down carefully, his movements deliberate. "Staying where exactly?" "Here. In the territory." She took a deep breath. "With you, if you'll have me." His eyes, those startlingly blue eyes that had been the first thing she truly saw after being rescued from the desert, widened in surprise. "Willa, you don't owe me anything. I told you that." "This isn't about debt," she said, rising from her chair and moving toward him. "It's about choice. For the first time in years, I'm making my own choice, not following someone else's plan for me." Reese studied her face, searching for any sign of uncertainty. Life on a ranch isn't easy, especially for a woman used to city comforts. "I'm stronger than I look," Willa said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And I'm a quick learner." "People will talk," he warned, "a single woman living with a man she's not married to." "Then marry me," Willa interrupted, surprising herself as much as him with her boldness. Reese's expression shifted from shock to something softer, more vulnerable than she had ever seen on his weathered face. "Willa, you barely know me." "I know enough," she countered. "I know you're kind and brave and honest. I know you saved my life when you could have ridden past. I know that when I think about the future, it's your face I see, not Boston's streets." He moved toward her then, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands, rough from years of ranch work, cupped her face with exquisite gentleness. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Really sure?" In answer, Willa rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was a tentative kiss at first, an exploration, but it quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Reese's arms encircled her, careful of her still healing shoulder, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" Willa asked, a smile in her voice. "That's a yes," Reese confirmed, "though I reckon we should make it official before we head back to the ranch." They were married the next morning by the local justice of the peace, with Mrs. Hollister and the town blacksmith serving as witnesses. Willa wore a simple blue dress that Reese had purchased for her, her first new garment since Theodore had abandoned her in the desert. Reese wore his best shirt, freshly washed and ironed by Mrs. Hollister, who had taken a maternal interest in the proceedings once she understood what was happening. The ceremony was brief. The words ancient and familiar, binding them together in the eyes of God and the law. When the justice pronounced them man and wife, Reese kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Willa's eyes. "Mrs. Montgomery," he murmured against her lips, and the name felt right in a way that Sutton never had. They left Tucson that same day, riding double on Reese's horse as they had come, but this time with a lightness of spirit that made the journey seem shorter, the sun less harsh, the future bright with promise. As they approached the small cabin that was now their home, Willa felt a sense of peace settle over her. The desert, which had nearly claimed her life, now stretched out around them like a vast protective sea. The same sun that had once been her enemy now warmed her skin pleasantly, and the man whose arms encircled her, whose heartbeat she could feel against her back, had transformed from rescuer to husband in a turn of events so unexpected that it still seemed like a dream. "Welcome home, Mrs. Montgomery," Reese said as they dismounted in front of the cabin. "Home," Willa echoed, the word tasting sweet on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." In the months that followed, Willa threw herself into ranch life with a determination that both impressed and amused Reese. She learned to cook over an open fire, to mend fences, to tend the vegetable garden with a skill that surprised even herself. Her shoulder healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar as a reminder of her former life. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper porch. Reese's cattle herd grew, as did their savings. Letters arrived from Boston, tentative at first, then increasingly warm as Willa's parents adjusted to the idea that their daughter was not only alive, but happily married to a rancher in the Arizona territory. "Will you ever go back to visit them?" Reese asked one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Willa considered the question, her hand absently stroking her slightly rounded belly, another new development, one that filled both of them with nervous excitement. "Someday," she said finally, "but not yet. This is where I belong now." Reese's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her closer against his side. "I still can't believe my luck," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Finding you out there in the desert, half dead but fighting to live." "It wasn't luck," Willa said, turning to meet his gaze. "It was destiny. Theodore left me for dead, but you found me and said, 'Not yet.' And you were right. It wasn't my time to die. It was my time to start living." As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the world in the gentle indigo of desert twilight, Reese captured her lips in a kiss that spoke of passion and promise, of a love born in adversity but nurtured in peace. And Willa Montgomery, once left to die in the desert, embraced the life and love she had found in the most unexpected of places, the wild, beautiful heart of the American West.